Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Refuel. So glad you're joining in this evening. Now, I hope you're having an awesome week. We've had an interesting week here in Slippery Rock. We thought we were going to get 6 to 9 inches of snow last night. We ended up getting 1 inch of snow and 1 inch of freezing rain. I love snow. I feel ripped off, but it's okay. God's in charge of the weather. But wherever you are, I hope that you are dry, you're safe, you're warm inside. I am in my shop. I have my wood burner going. It's 68 degrees in here, and I am rocking my Waffle House mug this evening for refuel. But I am really glad you're here. Now, last week, we had a homework assignment, and the homework assignment was this. God promises to provide for us, protect us, strengthen us, heal us, and give us a purpose. Are you struggling to trust God in any one of these areas? And I said, bring those areas to God in prayer. So I hope you have done that this week. If you're struggling in any of those areas, to trust God to provide for you, to protect you, strengthen you, heal you, and to give you a purpose, just continue to bring those to God in prayer until God gives you a peace about what you're praying over. Now, last week we talked about CNC, which is computer numerical control. And I showed you this sign that we made last week and showed you the detail that went into making this sign. Now, the sign looks wrecked right now, and I'm going to explain that a little bit later. But I said God is like a CNC machine, because once you get a CNC machine working, it doesn't require an operator to be there. And God is like that. There are things that God can do in our life that only God can do that He does not need our help with. So God automatically does these things in our life, like protect us and provide for us and take care of us and strengthen us and heal us and give us a purpose. Those are the things that only God can do, and there's not much we can do to help in those things that only God can do. I said there are things that we need to do, but there are things that only God can do. And that's why God is similar to a CNC machine. Well, tonight we are going to talk about resin, or epoxy resin. And resin or epoxy resin, it's a synthetic resin which can have many different uses. Now, the resin is created by mixing two components, and I have these two components right here. This happens to be the resin I've been using in the shop for the last couple months, and this is the resin solution itself. This is the hardener. And in my case here, I need to mix this in a ratio of two parts resin, 1 part hardener or activator. So if I'm going to use 8 ounces of the resin, I'm going to need 4 ounces of the activator or the hardener. And I use a scale to do that. And I just mix it in a cup. I have just a little food scale that I use to make sure I get the measurements accurate. And then it says to mix it thoroughly. Like it tells you to mix it for 5 solid minutes. And what happens when you do that is it causes a reaction that heats the resin up. And then it will take 48 to 72 hours to cure. Now, the resin can be poured clear, which you're going to see an example of that in a little bit. But it can also, you can add pigments to it. This happens to be mica powder, and this is kind of a purple mica powder. And the mica powder is so fine of a powder that you got to be careful because it gets everywhere. Here's one of my favorite colors. This is called azure blue, and I can mix this with the resin that has been mixed together, and it will give it a blue color, this azure blue color. Now, the mica powder has like a pearlescent effect to it, so it gives it a bit of a sheen and a little bit of a bling to it. I can also use just straight liquid color, and this is kind of a burgundy color here. You see, this is not blingy. This has no pearlescent. It's just a straight opaque color. And then here's an orange and here's a black. I got to throw my Harley colors in there. So I can mix those pigments with it to give it a color. And I'll show you that in just a minute or two. Now, to my left is the sign that I carved last week on the CNC machine. And you're going to see a video is going to come up on the full screen. And it shows me mixing, stirring the resin, and then pouring it into the carved letters. And you can see that it is in liquid form because it has just been mixed within the last 10 minutes. And as you pour it in, it fills all the nooks and crannies. It fills all the gaps. And that's one of the greatest qualities about the resin that there is. So in the video, you can see it being poured in. Now, here's the actual board right here. And you can see, I can touch it. But it's not quite hard. This has been hardening for 72 hours, but because of the temperature that it's been here in the shop, I actually didn't heat the shop for 2 days, so the temperature went down to about 55 degrees here, and it just didn't cure as fast as I wanted it to. So I'm gonna give it one more full day, but I can just push my fingernail into that resin and feel that it did make a mark on there. So tomorrow, I won't be able to make a mark in that, and then I'll be able to run this through my drum sander, and then all that's gonna be left at that point is gonna be the wood and the resin that's filled in the letters and the vines here that are up in the corners and at the bottom. That's all that will be left. And you won't be able to tell if this is just a board or not, because the resin will have filled it completely and permanently. I'll set this back over here. Now another video is going to come up on your screen, and that is a sign that I made here for the shop, TCF Woodworks. And I used clear resin in that. So the letters were carved out on my CNC machine in a piece of rustic hickory. And then once it was carved, I poured the clear resin into the letters. And then after 72 hours of it curing, I was able to run it through my table saw. And you can run your hand right over that letter and over those letters, and you can't tell where the resin is or where the wood is. It feels like one piece. And you can see that it's clear because I do have some LED lights inside the sign, and they're changing colors for the video, and you can just see the colors change. And that's what I wanted, was to be able to change the colors depending on my mood or whatever was going on here in the shop. I like that kind of effect for the sign. Now the last thing I want to show you that I've worked on with resin here in the shop are these. These I made for my friends at Eyes of Faith Optical, Jim and Amy Schneider. And I'm going to bring this one up a little bit closer so you can actually see it. And this is a piece of black walnut, and I carved into it Eyes of Faith. And then I put some of the silvery type of mica powder in the mix. And the same thing, I let it harden for 3 days, ran it through my drum sander, and then I came out with something that looks really cool. This one that actually has some blue glasses in it, and their logo is laid over top of the blue glasses. This actually was a double carve and a double pour. I poured the glasses first, I carved the glasses first, poured the blue resin in it, let it harden for 3 days, smoothed it out on my drum sander, then I carved the words, Eyes of Faith, and then I poured a white opaque resin in it to give the white of the letters, and then I sanded it again. Then it took me 2 days to put the finish on. So this little block, which this is an advertising block, it's a prototype that they asked me to make for them, and this took 9 days to make because of the drying and curing process that it takes for the resin to work. So that's just a few applications of resin that we can use in the shop. There's so many other things that you can do with it. You can make tabletops out of it. You can pour it to make a very hard finish over your tabletop. Now, the greatest characteristic of the resin I found is that it's a liquid once it is mixed, And as it begins to start going through that chemical process of heating up, it's a liquid. So then it can be poured into any shape or over the imperfections of the wood, and it fills every nook and cranny. It permanently and completely fills every void that is on the wood. And so once the resin is cured and it is a solid, so like this, if you were to hold this in your hand, you can run your hand over that and you can't tell where the resin is and where the wood is. If you closed your eyes, it would just feel like a block of wood with some rubber feet on the bottom. That's all it would feel like. It becomes a permanent thing in the wood. Now, God is very much like resin, only He can fill every void in our life completely and permanently. I'm going to say that again. God is like resin because only He can fill every void in our life completely and fully. Now, we as humans, we are filled with imperfections. We are filled with voids in our life. Some of them we're born with. Some of them we create ourselves. And we desperately try to fill those empty places in us with anything that we can fill them with. So tonight, as we talk about resin, we're going to ask 3 questions. And here's the first question we're going to ask. Number 1, what causes us to have voids in our life? What causes us to have voids in our life? The voids in our life can also be described as feelings of emptiness. That emptiness can be caused by many different factors. And here's just a couple. Maybe there was once something or someone in your life and they are no longer there. So now there is a void or an emptiness in your life. There's an empty place at the table. There is an empty room at your house, or now you're sleeping in an empty bed for the first time in a long time. Now, instead of having plans and a sense of purpose, you might be feeling things like you're feeling lost, feeling empty, and uncertain of the future. Here's another thing that can cause voids and emptiness in our life. Maybe it's not because of something that was there and now is gone. Maybe it's something we've never had from the beginning. So there's never been a ring on your finger. There's never been a child in your womb. There's never been a title by your name, or you've never had a true direction or purpose in your life. Things that have never been there. The dreams that you have had, they're not coming true, and so you're frustrated and the voids seem almost near to impossible to fill, especially as the years progress on. Or maybe you can't pinpoint exactly where that void is coming from. You don't know where it's coming from, only that you have an emptiness in you, in your soul. And it's there, but you can't pinpoint what isn't there. So often, the void and the emptiness comes from us comparing ourselves to others. So we compare ourselves to others and we look at and say others, they have someone to be with, they have a hope, they have joy, they have a purpose. And I don't have that. And that creates a void. And what that does when we compare ourselves with other people, it puts a punctuation, it puts an exclamation point behind our void. We have a void, exclamation point. We have an emptiness, exclamation point. And that, I want to tell you, is a trap of the enemy. It is a snare that the enemy puts there, that comparing ourselves to others. Now, sometimes that emptiness, it just gives us like a nagging. Like we've got a nagging emptiness in us, but sometimes that void or that emptiness becomes so powerful, it almost incapacitates us. And that's what we want to avoid, is that incapacitation. Now, we're still talking about what causes us to have voids in our life. So what are some symptoms that are associated with feeling empty or feeling a void in your life. These are the more serious types of symptoms that you can have. You have no motivation or purpose. You have no energy. You feel physically and emotionally exhausted all the time. You're not sleeping well, or maybe you're sleeping too much. You feel helpless. You have no joy and no hope, or little joy and little hope. And you might have been isolating yourself away from people who can help you. Now, there's a guy in the Bible, King David. And King David, he wrote what are called lament psalms. And I think David was a professional lamenter. And lamenting means that a person is expressing passionate feelings of grief and sorrow. David lamented often. And I'm going to share with you 4 of his lament psalms and just some phrases that I pulled out of his lament psalms. Psalm 6, verses 6 through 7. And it says, I'm weary with my groaning. All night I make my bed swim. I drench my couch with tears. My eyes waste away because of grief. Now, our emptiness is sometimes caused by loss and grief. There was someone there was something there, and now they're not there. You know, it can affect our sleep, our motivation. It can steal our joy and our hope, and it can leave us feeling just helpless. Now, Psalm 38, verse 4, David says, my guilt has overwhelmed me like a burden too heavy to bear. Now, this feeling that David is expressing is definitely for something that he did to himself. David lusted over Bathsheba, had an affair with her. She became pregnant. He tried to cover up his guilt to do this, covered up the fact that she is pregnant with his child. He killed Uriah, her husband, sent him up to the front of battle, and then pulled everybody away, so he was left vulnerable, and he was killed. So in this, David is lamenting because of something that he did. He has a void in his life because he feels like God has left him. God has left him to his guilt and his sorrow. It's something that he did to cause that emptiness. Now, Psalm 36, verses 6 through 8, it says, I am bowed down and brought very low. All day long I go about mourning. My back is filled with searing pain. There is no health in my body. I am feeble and utterly crushed. I groan in anguish of heart. David is expressing physical signs and symptoms, physical and emotional signs and symptoms because of how he is feeling. He has this emptiness. He has this longing. He feels that God has left him, and he is getting physical manifestations from it. Now, the last one is Psalm 42, verse 6. It says, why, my soul, are you downcast? Why so disturbed within me? Now, the devil wants to torture us with our feelings of emptiness and longing. And the devil wants us to have no motivation or purpose, no energy. He wants us to feel physically and emotionally depleted all the time. He doesn't want us to sleep well, or maybe he wants us to sleep all day long. He wants us to have no joy and no peace, and he wants to isolate us from anyone who can help us. It's a tactic, a trap of the enemy to play upon our emptiness and our void in our life. So whether our emptiness is caused by loss or grief, or from something that was once there and is now not, or something that has never been there, or we just don't know where it's coming from, regardless of why we have it, we have a void that needs filled. We have an emptiness that needs filled. So our first question was, what causes us to have voids in our life? And those were just some of the things that cause us to have voids in our life. Now, the second question we're going to talk about is this: how do we attempt to fill our voids? How do we as humans attempt to fill our voids? What do we fill our emptiness with? Too often, we fill our emptiness with things that are temporary and will not last. Listen to 1 John chapter 2, verse 16. It says, "For the world offers only a craving for physical pleasure, a craving for everything we see, and pride in our achievements and possessions. These are not from the Father, but are from the world." Here are some examples of things that we as humans try to fill our emptiness with, our void. Number one, relationships. We can feel so empty that we will fill our emptiness with relationships that aren't healthy for us. We're so desperate to be loved sometimes, or so desperate to be filled, that we're not picky about the company that we're keeping. It's just almost like it's a person. It's just someone to be with. And these people may be a bad influence on us. These people may be controlling, but because we're so desperate to be loved, or we're so desperate to fill that void, that emptiness in our life, we don't recognize the warning signs that that person is toxic for our life. Here's something else. Things and possessions, material things and possessions. Many times we fill our emptiness with material things that we just don't need. And we get pleasure and fulfillment out of the next great purchase. And then when that purchase comes, the joy and the happiness wears off. We're left with another void, and we have to purchase again and again and again and again, because material things are only temporary. You only get a temporary fill of your emptiness with something like that. And having the latest and greatest of anything, it will never fill that emptiness permanently. It's only a temporary fix. Here's something else that we fill our life with, and these are activities. Often we'll fill our schedule so much that what we do is we mask our loneliness. We mask our emptiness. We mask that void in our life. We stay so busy that we forget about our emptiness. And the trouble with that is the emptiness is always there. It's just covered up. That's all it is. It's always there unless you deal with it permanently. And lastly, here's something else that we fill our life with. Work. Work. Some people get obsessed with their work. And the trouble with that is there's no balance in your life. You try to cover up your loneliness by immersing yourself in your job. But that's only going to be temporary. You can only do that for a certain amount of time, just to constantly be working all the time. So when we try to fill our emptiness with relationships and material things and activities and work, when those things are taken away, we are left with the void. The cycle repeats, and the cycle repeats, and the cycle repeats, and the cycle repeats. And those things we will call the unhealthy void fillers. Those are our unhealthy void fillers. Now, let me say something. There's nothing wrong with relationships and material things and activities and work. But if we're using them to bring us fulfillment in life, they will never bring a permanent and complete fulfillment. Do you understand that? There's nothing wrong with those things. But if we're looking to find purpose and we're looking to find fulfillment in those things, it will never last. They're only temporary fixes. So that is, how do we attempt to fill our voids? We use those unhealthy void fillers. Now, the last question we're going to talk about tonight is this: how does God fill our void? How does God fill our void? Now, remember I said that resin, when it is mixed correctly, it permanently and completely fills the void that is in the piece of wood. When this gets sanded, you will not be able to tell where the resin starts and the wood picks up. It will be completely and permanently bonded together with the wood. There's nothing you can do to separate those two ever again. Now, just like resin that has filled every void to this carving to my left here, the voids were filled completely and permanently. God does the very same thing. God is the only one who can fill our emptiness and our voids in our body, in our soul, permanently and completely. Now write this down. Write this down. Healthy void fillers. We talked about unhealthy void fillers. Now, healthy void fillers always have a spiritual component. Healthy void fillers always have a spiritual component. So what are healthy void fillers? Pursuing a relationship with God through prayer and meditation, through Bible study, through small group involvement, through corporate fellowship and worship with like-minded believers, or using our spiritual gifts to serve God and others. These are way better ways of filling the voids that we sometimes feel. Here's another thing you can write down. Only through a healthy relationship with Jesus Christ can our spiritual and emotional void be filled completely and fully. Only through a healthy relationship with Jesus Christ can our spiritual and emotional voids be filled completely and fully. Listen to this, Philippians 4, verse 19. But my God shall supply all your need. Notice it doesn't say desires. It doesn't say wants. It says need. But my God shall supply all your need according to his riches in glory by Christ Jesus. He will fill our need. Now here's the key to filling your emptiness permanently and completely. Here it is. We find it in Psalm 37, verse 4. Delight yourself also in the Lord, and he shall give you the desires of your heart. Delight yourself in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. When we delight ourselves in the Lord, when we make him a priority in our life, the priority in our life, his will becomes our will. Not our will becomes his will. We can't bend God's will to our will. We're the only ones that can bend. So when we delight in the Lord, he will give us the desires of his heart. Why? Because his will become our will. His desires will become our desires. We don't bend God to us. God bends us to him. So when we allow God to be the one to fill our voids and our emptiness, we won't need anything else to fill us up. Let me say that again. When we allow God to be the one to fill our voids and our emptiness, we won't need anything else to fill us up. Then, or therefore, we're free to enjoy relationships, material things, activities, and work, because those won't be the things that we use to define us or fulfill us. Do you understand that? God will be the one that gives us our desires. God will be the one to fill us and give us purpose so we can enjoy those things that God gives us, relationships and activities and material things and work, because they will not be what give us hope and a purpose and fill our voids. God will be the one doing that. Those become God's blessing in our life. And then we have a healthy balance of our life because God is the person that we're finding our fulfillment in. And he is the one to fill our void and our empty spots completely and permanently. So just like resin can fill every void in an imperfection in the wood, God is the only one who can fill every single void that we have and do it completely and permanently. So here's your homework for this week. I have 2 questions that I want you to ask yourself. And question number 1 is this: how do I attempt to fill my emptiness? Not me. I'm going to ask myself that question. How do you attempt to fill your emptiness? Ask that question. And here's the second question: how does God want to fill my void, my emptiness? How does God want to fill my emptiness? I'm going to be praying for you this week as you answer those questions, as you take those questions to God. I want you to think about tonight's lesson, about resin and how it fills us completely and fully, how we have those unhealthy void fillers that we tend to use to give us purpose, to give us hope, and to fill our emptiness. But God is the only true one who can fill us completely and permanently, filling that emptiness so that we don't experience that. Then we can enjoy the things that God brings into our life as blessings, because they won't be what is trying to temporarily fill us. Let me pray for you, and I'm going to wish you a very good night. God, I thank you so much for everything that you do for us. I thank you so much for tonight's lesson that you gave me, because it truly came from you. And God, I don't want anything in my life to fill me and give me hope and give me a purpose. I want you to be the one to do that, to fill every void that I have, every loneliness, every empty spot in my life. I want it to be filled with you completely and permanently. I pray that for everybody who is listening in tonight or watching, tuning in via YouTube tonight, that God, they would want you to be the only one to fill them to overflowing permanently and completely. Then we're free to enjoy the things that you give us as blessing. God, I thank you for everything that you're going to do in and through us. I pray that you give clarity of thought to everybody as they're doing their homework this week. Protect us from the cold weather and the ice. I pray for everybody that's traveling that you will keep them safe. And we just thank you in advance for what you're going to do and how you are going to help us and how you are going to fulfill us and fill every void and every empty place we have permanently and completely. We thank you and we pray to you in Jesus' mighty name. And God's people said, amen. Have a very blessed night, everybody.